Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara. Episode 25. Shri Mahaswami, the Sage with Eyes of Light. The Diary of a Seeker of Truth. Dr.Serge Demetrian. Dear devotees, now we shall listen to the second section of part 2 of this divine book under the subtitle The Lotus Pond. Karveti Nagar, 31st August 1971. The Fight Against Fear. Yesterday, on the steps of the Venugopala temple, I had the opportunity to meditate for about 30 minutes at less than 1 meter distance from Shri Mahaswami. He had started the day by performing a pradakshina of the main shrine, during which he had stopped for a long pause in order to press his forehead on a certain spot on the wall of the temple. For what reason? I will never know. However, what is sure is that I went quickly to that spot and touched it with my fingers before the people who were around him rushed there, which is what actually happens. Then he sat on the stairs of the temple. He allowed me to come very near and kept me there alone in front of him. With his unique talent as a stage manager, he sent a large group of visitors further back. Night had fallen. By the dim light of the moon, I could see in the temple a chorus of youngsters who were reciting the Vedas. I invoked Shri Mahaswami in his form of light, but also as Adi Shankara and Kamakshi, the great goddess. They came easily. I was able to feel them as complete living beings. From them emanated a subtle air formed of all that was finest, which our senses could detect. This current penetrated and inundated me with an unspeakable sentiment of happiness. It was concentrated in the form of a pillar of white light which placed itself of its own accord in the center of my body, that was felt to be in front of the spine or vertebral column. From there, it irradiated a blinding brilliance of diamonds articulated by a spray of rays. Everything lasted a few seconds or perhaps a few minutes. During this blessed interval, the feeling of individuality was wiped out almost totally. After some time, as the individuality threateningly tried to return, I turned once again towards the three masters of wisdom just mentioned and tried with all my might to bring at least one of them into my heart. But it was Shri Mahaswami who reached there first. He engaged himself in every organ of this body, starting with the head and the nervous system and finishing with the blood. Everything was invaded. There was left only a faint mark of individuality residing in a blurred bodily frame, mostly a mental sketch of an individual. Indeed, what could still be called a body was changed in a thin, whitish fog. Suddenly it became impossible to maintain even this reduced state of individuality. The acute perception of a precipice appeared in front of me. I was on a straight rope encircled by a cold, dark, unknown abyss. I was so afraid that for a moment I felt I was about to jump into a dark, largely open well in the temple's yard nearby to my left, which attracted me. This terrifying experience had happened several times. Yesterday, it just felt stronger. I had been overpowered before by this fear and its manic desire to get rid of this body in the lotus pond, and this in the very presence of Shri Mahaswami. Indeed, long, intense meditations increase the cerebral tension. It was he who once again slowly brought me back to normality, as probably I had passed beyond the limit of resilience of the nervous system. I was able to turn afresh to the reality without form, good and luminous, which was waiting. Somewhere it seemed around me or in the interior of my being. Hardly had the sense of individuality aspired towards this reality than I was invaded by a fine and transforming light that replaced everything with its presence. The radiation was more intense and steady, and the loss of individuality continues. But for how long? Who could say when nobody was there to count the units of time? At the return of the body consciousness, I was incapable of moving my limbs. I sat nailed to the temple stone step and watched the departure of Sri Mahaswami without being able to make even the vaguest gesture of respect. The idea of re-entering the stream of mundane life that was about to restart, so different from what I had just experienced, raised a wave of grief. The emotion gripped my throat. In addition, he was no more there. Only he could have saved me from the misery of the transitory existence. I closed the eyes, dejected, hoping to see him near me, at least in the mind, although he had already walked quite far away. Sri Mahaswami had heard me. His image came to me. He was smiling with soothing gestures, just as one caresses a young child who inadvertently ran into a tree. "Who is afraid?" he was asking in direct language, without any words but through the medium of instantaneous understanding. "You and I, we are one. We have the same heart. Do you want the proof? Look at me. Right at the center." I was compelled to meditate on the middle of his chest. Almost immediately, his Spatika Linga burst out, a large, dazzling light protected from behind by the head of a golden cobra. The force of this vision compelled me to open the eyes. So strong was the glare that it was blinding. The next moment, the linga with its golden cobra took its place in my heart, but this penetration was accompanied by a wave of pain. My breath stopped, and the heart of flesh hesitated. For a moment, I reeled. The vision faded away, and in its place lingered a little white and slightly bluish sun. Week after week, the body became purer. The predominant thoughts were less violent, the passions less colored. I renounced any plans for the future, or to ruminate on the past, or to construct imaginary stories. I distanced myself more and more from desire and anger. Karveti Nagar, Wednesday, 1st September 1971. The visionaries of the Upanishads, and here I am thinking of the 10 principal Upanishads, did not bequeath us any accounts of their mystical experiences. Perhaps they considered them of little worth. If one is dedicated to pursuing the Absolute, should one allow oneself to be delayed by trying to express it through words? This perhaps is the explanation of their omission in recording direct encounters of the heart. As for myself, I cannot stop maintaining this diary with the various experiences in the company of Sri Mahaswami. Karveti Nagar, Thursday, 2nd September 1971. The Universal Puja. After a difficult afternoon with setbacks and smaller health problems, I witnessed once again on this Ekadasi night one of the universal pujas of Sri Mahaswami. It was 9 p.m. and Swamiji, while sitting outside his hut, was about to finish one of his long series of talks, 3 hours in length this time, with different visitors. Generally, as much as my elementary knowledge of the Tamil language permits me to understand, Sri Mahaswami, while talking on various subjects with the people, seems not to deal with or demonstrate precise ideas. One would say that he instructs them without their knowledge, making use of the words as a pretext to pass on to them while they are captivated by his speech. What is beyond the words? In this way, their harmful tendencies get negated in the net of his words. I was very near to him and I felt how the vibrations of his voice removed certain foreign substances that weighed down my mind and my body. Once I was receptive and able to receive more, Sri Mahaswami responded without haste. He was never in hurry, meaning he was always in the right position to perfectly utilize his time. He came down the some 15 stairs of the lotus pond and stopped at the last one, where he sat down on a small mat of dried herbs facing east towards the water. The shadow of a rather tall flame of the oil night lamp danced on his ochre orange cloth. As always, when he wanted to instruct me, he had removed mentally the other participants on his right side, which was where I was standing at 5 meters from him, also on the last stair before the water's edge. He took care to be in the full light. I observed at regular intervals how brilliant his right eye was as he repeated his invocations. His abundant hair and the beard formed a white halo round his fine and energetic face. For a few minutes, Sri Mahaswami sat straight looking ahead to the other side of the reservoir, as if he was waiting for something to appear from the surface of the water or beyond. Quickly, the swarms of insects that flew about every night concealed themselves in the bushes that encircled the reservoir. Deprived of their usual prey, the dragonflies stopped their haphazard movements and sheltered in the burgeoning leaves of the lotuses. The bats retired to the tall tree behind the hermitage where they had their nests and ceased chirping. The fish and toads did not plop in the water, and the surface of the reservoir became calm and even, like a sheet of glossy black paper, which became the floor of an immense stage with the ceiling decorated by stars. Nature seemed to wait. One had the feeling that in the growing obscurity of evening, eyes approached furtively and thronged the high terraces of an unseen amphitheater above the crests of the trees on the reservoir's banks. Those eyes, thousands of pairs, were riveted on the single point of light, Sri Mahaswami. Everything started discreetly with a few ritual movements for the purification of the body and of the danda in accordance with tradition. The purity in itself is still in need of purification. A short prayer and suddenly Sri Mahaswami united his palms and fingers, and arms stretched, he directed them successively towards all the directions of the space. There are 10 in the Hindu tradition. He energetically raised and lowered his hands, while his head bent in the same direction where his hands moved. One would have said that from all directions he called acquaintances, invited some guests, I suppose, seen only by him, and requested them to sit nearby. After some time, the space all around the entire stage of the lake became so charged, so dense, that it was hard to breathe. Everywhere there was someone. The time had now come to tell why they have been convened. Opening his palms, he started discussing with everyone through gestures. With his hands, he encircled a spot in the space as if he was caressing a child and inquired if he was well. He moved to another nearby. He jumped to a third one, farther away, only to return to the first one to whom it was necessary to convey a word. After having received in this way tens and hundreds of spirits seen only by him, his gestures became larger and more expressive. He seemed to tell them why they had been summoned. Some did not understand. He had to repeat. Some needed clarifications. Finally, all were informed what it was all about. Now the discussion became general. The long and fine fingers of Sri Mahaswami, with the talent of an accomplished mime, made everybody talk without a word. Louder, we do not hear you. And you, he seemed to say while turning to the other side of the assembly, wait for your turn. What about that group on the back? What is your opinion? Oh, yes, and if you clarify your statement? He seemed to conduct an immense symphonic orchestra from a score known only by him. He was preparing the final fortissimo. Now Sri Mahaswami suddenly started giving orders, a rapid burst of energetic movements which were deprived of everything that could be identified as external signs of prayer. They were precise gestures to catch an object seen only by him, but whose reality was unquestionable. He spread out his arms in different places, then he gave mute explanations with a stretched finger here and there. From time to time, he showed movements of appeasement and further clarification to those who needed them. It seemed to me as if from his slender fingers shot flashes of mute lightning bolts, while from his white palm trickled an elixir received with veneration by the entire nature gathered in awe on the concentric terraces of the amphitheatre, whose last steps lost themselves somewhere towards the stars. Thousands and thousands of eyes were captivated by the one luminous center in this creation. The rather strong flame of the oil night lamp tried in vain to exceed Sri Mahaswami. It was really he who lent his own lustre to the wick. Covered as he was by his ochre orange cloth that he often readjusted back on his head with energetic movements. He looked like a triangle of almost solidified light. I stared at him along with those who had also received from him the power to see. He was the origin of all forces. He had abandoned for a while the aspect of a wandering monk under which he screens himself every day in order not to frighten us, in order not to crush us. He had assumed his position of master and presided over the orders as the emperor that he was. For a certain moment, Sri Mahaswami remained quiet, the sole center of thousands of focused eyes. I continued looking at him, as did all who stood around, when I clearly heard him singing a simple melody, a sort of short appeal he repeated 3 times with his true voice, which seemed to me an undulating tendril of thick light, like the steady or slow-moving flashes which sometimes gush out of his eyes. And the created beings listened, both the moving and the non-moving. They all knew, up to the last one, that without him, deprived of his presence, of his word, they would crumble and descend into the formless chaos out of which they had been brought to life solely by his will. After some time, he looked as if he was satisfied, as if his orders were clear to everyone. However, before sending away those he had invited, there was one last procedure that had to be accomplished. He joined once again his hands with fingers and palms even tighter this time. Arms stretched, he resumed large circles towards all the directions of the space. The right ones were not equal to the left ones. He stressed the right side where I was standing, frozen, hands in Anjali. It was doubtless that he intended to include in the interior of the circles a certain entity residing in this one. This entity, which was still not free and sufficiently pure, was being progressively detached by the insistent and very precise movements. Suddenly, I had the clear feeling that it was the best of myself that was being separated from the surroundings. I understood this from the circles in which I was in all evidence included, and mostly by the fact that when I was drawn in, I felt at my left some kind of blade that cut me off from the rest of the world. When he had finished, I was more he than I was me. In my heart, there opened by itself a sort of diamond-like vertical trace of the size of a span. He had surely included me in his plans and had placed me in a definite place, for now I had to witness what was to follow. The moment has come when all those called by him, the immense, invisible audience who were waiting in silence, should be honored. Looking always at his invitees, he gathered one after another from 4 or 5 bowls of coconut bark the offering of the service, red kumkum powder, grey vibhuti powder, multicolored flower petals, and grains of white rice. Without mixing them, he left them fall as a fine rain into the lake, which seemed to reverentially receive them. The last act was approaching. Sri Mahaswami pierced me with his eyes several times. Sometimes I could perceive a black lightning, sometimes a firefly. Then he turned towards north. I saw him from the back and started meditating. My body, which could do almost nothing by itself, was ready to receive his presence, and this seemed to have been in what I was concerned with, the aim of the 4 last hours. Sri Mahaswami had destroyed totally and with so much mastery the I feeling that now he had entirely taken up residency in my flesh. He had completely replaced me with himself in what I was. By now he existed in 2 bodies, his and mine. The result was that I felt changed in the exquisite essential core of all the senses, crushed with happiness. Finally, one had escaped from suffering. One is free, free, free. One is oneself. One is Sri Mahaswami. One is the all. How to describe it? Devotees, we shall continue to listen to the lotus pond in the coming episode, bowing at the holy feet of the Gurus. Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara.